Hello, Year 11 and maybe even Year 10 if you're trying to get ahead. So this next video is going to be all about Macbeth's character development, just in case in the exam you get a question about character and in particular the character of Macbeth. Now, one thing to remember is that examiners want to see that you have an understanding that characters change throughout the course of the play, and they want you to track this and show them how you know this happens. So it's really important that you show the examiner that you understand that Macbeth changes throughout the course of the play. Who he is at the beginning is very different to the character we see at the end of the play. At the beginning, he is seen to be loyal to his king, communicative with his wife, ambitious yet gentle, and a hero, because remember at this point of the play, right at the beginning, Scotland is at war with Norway, and Macbeth is somewhat of a war hero. He's really held up as a fantastic soldier for the Scottish army. Whereas at the end, he's a murderer, he keeps things from his wife, he's mad, and there's an argument to say he's turned evil. So not only do you want to show the examiner that you have an understanding of this, but you also need to then support these points with evidence, and that's what we're going to be looking at next. So, in the beginning, we have Macbeth as loyal to his king, and a quotation to show this is, "O valiant cousin, worthy gentleman," taken from Act 1, Scene 2, and this is actually what King Duncan says about Macbeth. Now, I've highlighted the adjectives valiant and worthy to show just how the king feels about Macbeth, and at this point in the video, I'd pause this, jot down this quotation, and if you're not sure, look up these words in a dictionary. It's also worth noting that the king has said, "Oh valiant cousin," and perhaps he's used that word cousin to show just how much he loves Macbeth, almost like he feels he's part of the family, which of course is only going to make Macbeth's betrayal even worse. We've also said that Macbeth is ambitious yet gentle. And a quotation to show this is from Act 1, Scene 3, where Macbeth says, "My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man." And what this is saying is, this is the moment when Macbeth thinks, wow, the witches have said I could be king, and maybe that's going to come true, but that's only going to come true if something happens to the original king, King Duncan. So should I murder him? But at this point in the play, that thought of murder shakes him to his core, which is why I've highlighted that verb, shakes. Because comparing this to the Macbeth at the end, well, the Macbeth at the end seems to murder anybody who's standing in his way, and he does it without a second thought. We've also said that Macbeth is a hero, and so a quotation to show that, taken from Act 1, Scene 2, is, "For brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name." And a messenger actually says this to King Duncan when he's relaying what's happened during the war. And that adjective, brave, shows how everybody sees Macbeth. He's this brave soldier. He's somebody who has won the war for the king, and it's seen as a really positive thing. We also says that he's communicative to his wife. And a quotation to show that is actually a stage direction taken from Act 1, Scene 5. So remember, it's just as important to look at the stage directions as it is the lines that the actors say. So this quotation, "Lady Macbeth alone with a letter." And I've highlighted this word alone because it shows that Macbeth only wants to speak to his wife about what's happening. The witches have said something that has shaken him, that's going to change the course of his future. And the one person he wants to talk to is his wife. And so it's almost like this is the only person that he trusts with that information. Now if you have a look back over these 4 quotations, you'll notice that they're all taken from Act 1, which is a really good start to compare Macbeth at the beginning with Macbeth at the end. So if we look at Macbeth at the end of the play, we've said that he's a murderer. Now there is a huge difference between the killings that Macbeth would have done at the war at the beginning of the play and the murders that he's committing at the end of the play, and we're going to be looking at that into a little bit more detail. So this quotation, "to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus," is taken from Act 3, Scene 1. And this is when he's plotting to kill his best friend Banquo. And this is what I mean when I said that there's a difference between how Macbeth killed people in the war, his enemies, and the murders that he's doing now, because this is him murdering his best friend. And I've highlighted this word nothing because it shows that he isn't happy with being king until he is safely king. He wants to get rid of every other threat, and he wants to murder Banquo and his son because he's worried that Banquo knows what's been going on, and he wants to get rid of the threat of Banquo's sons becoming king. He also starts to keep things from his wife. He says, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck." And this is when Lady Macbeth is asking him what he's plotting, when he's starting to plot Banquo's murder, and he says to her, "Don't worry about it. You need to be innocent of this knowledge." And he calls her dearest Chuck, which is quite patronising, really. At the beginning of the play, we see them as equals. He tells her everything. He tells her what the witches said. And at this point of the play, he's almost speaking down to her. Don't worry about it. And we start to see this distance between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And a really good point to make, particularly in the exam, is that Act 3, Scene 4 is the very last time we see Macbeth and Lady Macbeth on stage together. So this power couple, where at the beginning of the play they were in cahoots with each other, they were planning with each other, they were equals, now there's this distance between them, which can only mean that things are going to go very badly for them. We also see a decline in Macbeth's mental health. When he sees Banquo's ghost in Act 3, Scene 4, he says, "Never shake thy gory locks at me." So we see that he is hallucinating, which of course is an indicator that his mental health is declining. But it also shows that maybe is coming from a space of guilt, because in his hallucination, the ghost of Banquo is shaking his head at him, his locks being his hair, which shows that he is shaking his head, as if he's disappointed with the acts that Macbeth has done. I've highlighted the adjective gory because it shows that the ghost that Macbeth is imagining is covered in blood. And of course, blood is a recurring image throughout Macbeth, showing the guilt. Of course, Lady Macbeth is forever washing her hands during her sleepwalking because she feels as if she has blood on her hands. It's the guilt that is making Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have these hallucinations, and that is disturbing their sleep. We've also included this idea that Macbeth turns evil. And the quotation that I have used to show that is this, from Act 4, Scene 2, "Give to the edge of the sword his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls." And this is when Macbeth is planning to kill Macduff and all of his family. And I've highlighted the word babes because he is saying murder all of Macduff's children. And surely anybody who is planning to murder children would be seen as evil. So what's really important is thinking about why did he change? Okay, it's great to tell the examiner how you know that there's a difference between the Macbeth at the beginning of the play and Macbeth at the end of the play. It's even better to back that up with quotations. But the examiner's also going to want you to say, why did he change? So perhaps it was his ambition. Perhaps it was this almost force that he couldn't control inside himself. He wanted to become king, and then he wanted to protect his crown. Perhaps it was the witches, and the witches are tied up in the theme of fate. It's almost as if Macbeth is a puppet on a string and the witches are controlling everything he does. And we see that because even right at the beginning, the first time we see the witches, they describe the day as foul and fair. And Macbeth's very first line in the play is when he comments on the day being foul and fair. And that reflection in the language perhaps show that the witches really do have control over Macbeth, and perhaps they were just toying with him and making him do all of these awful things that they know would lead to his downfall. So we've also discussed this idea of fate. It's a theme that you really need to look into Macbeth, and it makes us question, did he have a choice over what he did, or was it already written in the stars? We know that Macbeth is a tragedy, one of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies, and in a tragedy, fate always has a defining role. Does the character that has a massive downfall actually have any control, or is it the gods toying with them? Perhaps it's his wife's fault, because right at the beginning we see that Macbeth actually starts to back out of the plan of killing King Duncan, which is almost like the first domino in a cascade of killings. And it's his wife that almost bullies him. She manipulates him into doing this. Or perhaps it's ultimately a message from Shakespeare. Perhaps he's warning the audience, warning us about having too much ambition, and telling us that perhaps there is more important things than ambition in our life. Perhaps what's more important is love and is loyalty.